for you to start. Did you eat the cupcake?
Yeah, I did find out eventually that it was somebody, a math department, someone in my math department, it was their birthday, so he was sharing cupcakes. So
Okay, so it's safe to eat.
Yeah, it was safe to eat the cupcake. I did make it till like 9:30 before I took a bite. So I didn't have a cupcake at 8 in the morning.
Yeah, but cupcake for breakfast sounds like the way to go.
Yeah, there was coconut on there. It's sort of like a fruit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, what's your favorite scary movie?
What's my favorite scary movie? Well, probably The Thing. Not, I guess, that exciting of an answer, but John Carpenter's The Thing.
Mm-hmm. It's a classic.
It's just so great. I mean, and I never tire of watching it. I always feel like I find something new, and it's also like really fun to show people that haven't seen it before. That list for me is sort of growing shorter, but when I show my son, who is not really a horror fan, he loves the movie, even though he doesn't really like horror. Because I think it's just a good movie,
And it's well made.
Yeah, it's just...
Yes.
Yeah, it's fun to watch.
Definitely.
So, sorry, Brad, you first?
I was just going to say, I decided to do a little research, speaking of the scary movies. I heard you on the Shockwaves podcast when you were promoting Cabin, and you, towards the end, you started talking with them about the scary movies you had just recently watched, and I went on IMDb and added like 5 movies to a list so I wouldn't forget them. There was some really good stuff on there that sounded really interesting.
What ones? It's been a while, so I don't remember what I had mentioned on air.
There
Probably
was...
Lake Mungo, right?
Yes, that was the very first one. And then there was...
Well, I had a Kill List t-shirt on.
Kill List, and They Remain.
Oh, yeah. They Remain is an adaptation of my friend Laird's novelette. Yeah, strange movie. But really good, I think.
The poster alone is quite terrifying, even though it's just leaves.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh, well, thanks for listening. I'm glad
definitely.
you watched some of those movies, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hard to find a good scary movie to watch sometimes.
No, definitely. Yeah, and I feel like I'm getting pickier as I get older. I hope that doesn't mean I'm just getting grumpier. But actually, I just got to host a big screening of Lake Mungo in Houston a couple weeks ago, and that was a lot of fun because I'd never seen it on the big screen. So, that was wonderful.
Speaking of seeing horror movies on the big screen, I actually have tickets to go see The Shining in remastered 4K in the theater tomorrow.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So that's gonna be really fun.
I don't think I've seen that on the big screen. That's great.
Yeah.
It's good timing. The start of spooky season tomorrow.
No kidding.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So you mentioned that your son is not a big horror fan, and I know it was a picture of your daughter that first inspired A Head Full of Ghosts, correct? Or that was one of the inspirations?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly, I don't know if it was necessarily a picture of her. I just happened to have like a picture of her being creepy, scaling the walls. I think it was more, once I had this idea for A Head Full of Ghosts and the Two Sisters, I definitely used my daughter Emma, who was 8 at the time when I was writing the book, the same age as Mary. So, once I got into her character, I definitely used a lot of Emma's quirks and mannerisms. So much so that the book made my wife cry.
Aww.
Oh, wow.
I was like, come on, Mary lives. Spoiler.
Have either of your kids read the book?
Yeah, my son Cole read it last year. It was actually assigned to him by his AP creative writing high school teacher.
On purpose or on accident?
Yeah. No, well, I mean, my son got to go to the same school that I teach at, so... yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit of both, I suppose, but it was great because then he was forced by the pain of grade to read my book. And actually, I'm very thankful. It was a really wonderful experience because I know he enjoyed the book and we had some cool conversations about it. And I know it was strange for him to see, to read the book and see like all the different things that I took, from Emma, but also from him. Actually, a really important detail in the book of character detail of Mary. Not liking spaghetti sauce, but was my son as a child. He's only finally recently started to like spaghetti sauce. But maybe he shouldn't. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be like, that's a very important detail. You should take that one seriously.
Yeah.
So, obviously, there's a lot about We've Always Lived in the Castle that was part of this. Do you remember the first time you read it? Like, what was that experience like for you?
That's a good question. That's a great question. So it wasn't the first Shirley Jackson, I assume with most people. Well, I mean, besides The Lottery, which was assigned to me in 6th grade. But I wasn't, I won't count that necessarily as when I really didn't become like a reader for pleasure until like my early 20s. So when I basically rediscovered Shirley Jackson in my, as an adult or a young adult in my 20s, Haunting of Hill House was first.
Mm-hmm.
But soon after that was We Have Always Lived in the Castle, because I remember Penguin had put out a new edition with an introduction from Jonathan Lethem, who at the time was a writer that I was really getting into, and I saw him speak somewhere. So I was really excited to read this book with his introduction. And I read the book. I was just so blown away and captivated by the opening chapter in particular. Just the description of, werewolf with the extra knuckles. And I was just totally enchanted by the book. That it was sort of definitely, I would call it a horror novel, but it was hard to point to exactly why it necessarily was a horror novel. I think it was just more sort of the sum effect of the book. I don't know, it just sort of reinforced for me, when I read that, that my sort of love of reading comes, for the most part, character first. I mean, obviously some stories are different, but to me, that's why I always go back to Shirley Jackson, because her characters are so real and interesting and funny. I don't think anyone can quite mix humor with the uncanny and unpleasantness the way that Shirley Jackson has. So I mean, it's become a favorite, and I've certainly read it more than once.
Yeah, it's an interesting
kind
read.
of ashamed to say I've never read it.
You have to. I keep buying it for people. How have I not bought it for you yet?
Well, it's been sitting on my shelf. I found like a pristine copy at a thrift store, and it's just been sitting there.
Yeah, no, I get it. But now enough people have said you got to read it. I haven't watched the movie adaptation yet, which apparently is on Netflix now.
Yeah, it just came out. I just added it. I was just going to ask you if you'd seen it.
Not yet. I definitely plan on watching it within the next few weeks. I'm actually supposed to jump on a podcast to talk about just that book. So I also want to see the movie too, just to see how it compares.
Well, it's interesting that you said it's hard to describe why it's a horror novel, because I realized that if I would try and explain the plot to somebody, it would sound like an almost soapy drama. But it's not. Like, so much of that book is about the tone, I think.
No, absolutely. The tone, and like, you're not sure, the reliability of the storytellers there. And certainly like what's going on with the town. I mean, there's so many like, different forces impacting what goes on. That definitely has this sinister, but also at the same time, almost like this weirdly hopeful feeling for the sisters at the end,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So for you, you clearly enjoy horror both in film and in books. Have you ever written anything that scared you? Like, or where you put like something, one of your fears, or put something more into a scene or a moment than you expected?
Well, I definitely, put my own fears into everything. And it's hard because I feel like most of the time I'm just like, I can see the gears turning, so I'm so close. Typically what I do doesn't scare me. I'm scared by everything else. I'm a big scaredy cat when it comes to movies. And, I still don't like being home alone if it's dark out, and get freaked out, if I have to, if I'm going to bed and I'm the only one in the house. But I don't know, with my own stuff, I'm like a terrible judge if it's scary or not. But I will say I was, I don't know if it was actually myself that scared me. I think is what had happened. It just, I happened to be working on a story that just came out in Ellen Datlow's Echoes, big anthology. It's a 800-page anthology of ghost stories. And I was in the middle, I was in the story, sort of like in the moment, trying to write like a creepy scene. And it was broad daylight, but I was home by myself. And there was a loud crash from upstairs. And I don't know, I got the stereotypical, like, I remember the hair standing up in the back of my neck, and I was so freaked out. and, me and my little 15-pound dog, who wasn't going to protect me. I took more than a little of working up the courage to go upstairs. I may or may not have grabbed like a bat or something, even though I know there probably was like windows open or something. And what it was is like some bottle of shampoo had fallen off like the back of the toilet no, it was probably on a shelf in the shower, but still, it's like, why did it fall over? But yeah, I mean, so I was totally freaked out, and I think I ended up using sort of that kind of moment, or trying to put that kind of moment into the story that I was writing at the time.
It sounded like you really built the tension.
It did for me anyway.
It's so funny. That's like very similar to what happened to me earlier. I'm right in the middle of Disappearance at Devil's Rock, because I've never read it. I was right in the middle of a chapter, and I'm in the living room, and right next to us by the front door is a little shoe rack, and my roommate placed her purse on top of it. I had been sitting there for a good 30 minutes reading the book, and that bag just decided to fall over and crash on the ground for no apparent reason, and I damn near threw the book at it.
I thought you were going to say you thought there was a little boy curled up in the corner.
No. I was on one of those parts, so that definitely did not help when I heard that crash.
Yeah.
Good. Well, for every reader, I arranged something like that to happen.
Perfect timing.
See, that's why the first time I read A Head Full of Ghosts, I only read it in the daylight.
That's so that's so cool to hear. To go back to what I said, like, I have no idea if something's scary or not. Like, I felt like really good about A Head Full of Ghosts. One, I was excited. That was really my first like horror novel that I'd ever written. Like, all the horror stuff that I'd written previously had been short stories. So I was just excited that I'd written a horror novel. I thought it was good and like sort of smart and clever. But I had no idea if it was, I thought it was disturbing, but I wouldn't know if anyone would be scared by it. But my agent was, shopping it to editors, like within the first week, he got like a late night phone call, like 11:30 at night, from an editor he'd sent the book to. And the editor didn't identify herself. He just answered the phone. He was like, "Why is someone calling me so late?" Just answer the phone. And the woman on the other end said, "I just read the tongue scene and I had to hear someone's voice." And then she hung up. And so I was like, "Oh yeah." That was the first time I was like, "Oh, okay. Maybe the book might, have a good effect on some people."
Well, I think it hits two things that always really scare me. Is one, my mom's family is super Catholic, and I went to Catholic school for a couple years, and the old school Catholic, where they make you believe that possession is a real thing,
right? And
that because you're a kid, you're vulnerable. So possession has always scared the crap out of me, even when it's the possibility of it. And then also the idea that like it's the person that you love and who loves you is also the danger to you. Like, those are things that just get in all the little scary places in me, and you put those two things together, and it was just very, like, I just remember I sat with my like shoulders hunched to my ears for so much of it. So I was like, okay, I need to go read something happy. Like, I need a break.
Nice. Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is, funny. I've heard from so many people that, possession stories really get to them. Even like, an amazing horror writer like Stephen Graham Jones, like, talks about how, that's like the one place he's yet to go because it so, freaks him out. Partly because he's scared of, he's scared of the concept of possession, but there's also the whole like colonization aspect of possession. Him being, Blackfeet Native American. Yeah, I mean, even for people who aren't religious or non-believers, I mean, I think what you had said about, the person that you love, I think it also sort of digs at a little bit, like, yeah, so, you have your family members or your partner or, a sibling or whoever, and they start acting weird. I mean, even if it's not supernatural, the question comes up in your head, well, how well do I really know, them? How well do I really know anybody else? I don't know. Like, obviously, those are the kind of things you don't want to be walking around asking yourself, every minute of every day, because you're going to freak yourself out. But yeah, I mean, those sort of little subtle things I think are fun to play with.
Definitely. You had in the back of the paperback copy of Head Full of Ghosts, there's like you had like a little reading list, which is actually how I ended up reading We Have Always Lived in the Castle.
Oh, okay, cool.
But also I read that Come Closer by Sarah Gran.
Oh, that's great.
And that one was fun because it's like you see this person where you're like, is this relationship really just getting toxic and dangerous, or is she gonna murder this guy? Like,
right.
It was sort of that same idea.
Yeah, I know. Sarah does a wonderful job of, I think, getting, getting into your head as the reader, making you question, and like you said, just actually question everything that's happening. No, that's definitely a cool one. Well, good. I'm glad that some of these lists, people like the book enough that they would try other books or movies.
Definitely.
Was there any part, like a specific scene or just a good chunk of the book that you had a really hard time like writing, just from just a literary standpoint, or just trying to get your thoughts out?
So it was kind of funny. I thought I was gonna have the hardest time with like the blog posts, because for me, writing like nonfiction essays, which essentially that's what those are really hard for me to write, because I didn't go to school for English or for writing. I was a math major, so I certainly didn't have a lot of practice writing, critical essays or critical papers. But for whatever reason, those ended up actually being kind of fun to write. And even the whole book, like almost, I wouldn't call it an easy write, but it certainly went a lot faster than most of my books. I started it in February of 2013 and finished it really in late November of 2013. So for me, that was definitely a fast turnaround. And I know there were parts that were sticky, that made me like slow down a little bit, but nothing jumps out at me. I think really the hardest time was I was about 100 pages in, and so this was like early July of that same year, 2013, and I decided to show the first 100 pages to my editor, Stephen. Not my editor, sorry, my agent, Stephen. He's been my agent since 2006. We're very close, good friends. And I decided I needed to show him the first 100 pages. I typically never show like a partial. I decided I needed to show him those 100 pages because he thought I was working on a different book. For the prior year, like I'd been working on this book that I was going to call Charles Manson Doesn't Answer My Letters, which is still a great title, I think. But
yeah, it is.
And it was going to be sort of like this, almost like maybe horror, but also more sort of humorous book about like an 8th grader who wanted to end the world, but because he thought people suffered too much, he wasn't like an evil kid necessarily. And he was going to be writing letters to Manson, looking for advice. This was before he found out Manson was like a terrible person. So anyway, it was sort of a cool idea, but I wasn't feeling it. And after a year, I only had like 100 pages, and I was really looking for excuses to not work on that book. And then February, A Head Full of Ghosts just essentially like landed on my lap. It was like a really like one of those eureka moments that you dream about as a writer. So anyway, I didn't tell my agent that I'd put away the Manson book and was working on this other thing. So I said, hey, because he had asked me, hey, how's the Manson book coming? I'm like, well, I'm writing this possession novel. Yeah, possession novel. And I sent him the first 100 pages. In his defense, he didn't know, I didn't have an outline. It's one of the few novels I didn't write an outline for. So all I had were these 100 pages, and he didn't know what the rest of the book was going to be or what the whole thing was. And his feedback for the first 100 pages wasn't what I wanted to hear. Mainly because he was wrong. Just this, he admitted to this later. Like he was like, I don't know if this should be first person. Because a lot of the reveals that came in the book later wasn't there in the first 100 pages, and that really threw me for a loop. I think I didn't write on the book for like a week after that because I was really sort of distraught, and more so just like I had to decide if he was right or wrong, and I kind of knew he was wrong right off the bat, but it was just more me to work up the courage to be like, well, I'm just going to write it the way I think it should be written, and then we'll deal with it after it's done. So to Stephen's credit, when I emailed him the book when it was done, the first line of his email was, "Yeah, I'm so never been so happy to tell someone that I was so wrong." He loved the book, and so that was definitely, honestly, that's one of like the highlights of my professional career, because my first 2 crime novels I'm very proud of, but for a whole slew of reasons, they didn't do very well commercially. So I spent a few years sort of really down on myself as a writer and really struggling to get anything done. So A Head Full of Ghosts just felt like this, this ray of light. As dark as it is, it felt like this really hopeful thing for me. And so to have it sort of like work out just even that way, before it even sold, I felt like I had already succeeded with a book that my agent, really liked it and was excited about it. So, geez, that was a really long-winded answer to your question about was there a hard part to writing the book, but there you go.
No, that's good.
Yeah, I think you can see that energy in the story. I do actually have both your crime novels. I have not read them.
That's quite okay. William
I'm a
Morrow's.
fan of their covers though.
Oh,
Like
okay,
all
yeah,
those really strange like primary colors and patterns.
yeah.
Like those are
Thanks.
fun.
I like the Little Sleeps cover. I think the second cover was just kind of slapped together. But my publisher William Morrow is going to reissue those probably like in a year and a half. So that'll be fun. Because the versions you have are out of print now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're definitely kind of beat up secondhand copies. But I'm definitely one of those people where if I like something, I go all in. So when I liked A Head Full of Ghosts, I immediately turned around and bought Disappearance. I immediately tried to find the other two. So
Thank
that's
you.
how I work.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say like just briefly, like the two crime novels definitely sort of play with not so much ambiguity, but play with the idea of memories being not as sure-footed, an identity because the detective in both novels is narcoleptic, so he's not a very good detective. And when he falls asleep directly into like a dream state, and so he's not sure because his dreams are so vivid if it was real or not. So even then, you get a little bit of the whole. You eventually do get answers, but you get my earliest versions of is it real or is it not real kind of stuff.
Definitely. So speaking of is it real or is it not real? If there was ever going to be, no, this is not the question you think it's going to be, I promise.
Okay.
If there was ever going to be a show like The Possession, like a reality show saying this person is possessed, we're going to film this exorcism,
Right.
do you think that you would watch it?
No. And oddly enough, I think it wasn't quite the same, but the same summer the book came out, was it the channel Destination America, like a cable channel, announced, we're going to do a live exorcism. We're going to do a live exorcism in the supposed exorcist house. And it came to be, it wasn't a person. They were going to actually exorcise the house. So I think that would have been not as icky as watching someone attempt possession of a person. So I didn't watch that. And I definitely I would not watch an attempted exorcism of a real person because I don't think anyone's possessed by demons. I just don't think it's true. I think those are people that are, clearly suffering from, some sort of mental illness. And if they were putting it on TV, I think they are obviously taking advantage of that person. And when they're not of, clearly the right mind to be able to make any sort of decision on their behalf. So despite my being in and around Catholic institutions pretty much my whole life, I don't believe people get possessed by demons.
Bold statement.
Bold statement. Yeah. I'm knocking all the wood in the house just in case.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I actually wanted to. The obvious question I wanted to ask was the whole. Do you have a definitive ending for the story? But you had said something you knew from the get-go. You were wanting it to be ambiguous, even though I'm sure you may have your own interpretation.
So I can honestly say, when I first sat down, when the idea first hit me before I even knew what the novel was, how would I write a possession story? I was going to try to, do it, from a skeptical, secular point of view. But, once I got into, I said I didn't write an outline, but I definitely took some notes in a notebook and just sketched out a few ideas. But once I realized that, I don't know, I soon realized that ambiguity was really going to be the story, right? That to me, that was one of the sources of the horror, is that, you don't know what's going on. I wanted that to sort of reflect, in one way, I wanted that to reflect, sort of the time that we're living through now. And for me, doing typically when you do something ambiguous, it's the author holding back information from the reader. And I thought it was fun for this book. I feel like I did the opposite, whereas I bombarded and overloaded the reader with all sorts of data. Some of it conflicts, but no one's, conflicting, I guess, maliciously. No one's lying on purpose necessarily, but that's sort of the light. Yeah. It's how we live now. We're just inundated with so much data, so much information. Some of it is false, some of it isn't, and how do you figure out what's true or not? So to me, that's scary. That's a scary part of our daily existence.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, I mean, once I realized, okay, for this book to work, I really had to walk the line. So I definitely, divorced myself from any thought process of, okay, I'm going to do it I'm going to play it ambiguously, but this is the real ending. I honestly went into it, once I got to a certain point in the book, it said, okay, I need to be able to make two sort of equally argued cases for there's something supernatural happening, there's not something supernatural happening. Yeah. So, I mean, I get asked that all the time, and I keep saying honestly. Usually, when someone says honestly, they're actually trying to hide it. But in my case, I'm not. I really don't have an ending, like the ending of the book in mind, other than the last few pages of the book.
I actually think I think you executed it perfectly, because some either movies, books, whatever will end on an ambiguous note, but in a very frustrating way. Like there's 20 questions that can be asked, and I feel like you kind of just left us on just the one, and it was just the perfect one to end on, because you can do this, you can deconstruct it 40 different ways.
Well, thank you. Listen, I understand as a reader, and I know people can get frustrated with ambiguity, particularly if, like I mentioned, my interests as a reader tend to be more toward, the character stuff. I understand there are a lot of readers who are more like, and then what happens? That's what I'm interested in. I think for the ambiguity to work, it needs to be there for a reason other than just like a cheap parlor trick. You know what I mean? It needs to be part of the DNA of the story. Like there needs to be a reason why the ambiguity is there. And I tried to explain a little bit just how it reflects sort of like our day-to-day lives. But I mean, that's how I looked at it anyway.
Well, I think that's why it was so important for it to be first person, for Mary to be the narrator. Because she only can tell us what she knows. Like that's, I think, the difference between ambiguity and like a cliffhanger or an unanswered question is we only know what she knows, and we have to make our decision based on her information. That leaves doors open without it feeling like you're just trying to pull something over.
Right. No, I mean, Mary's definitely, I mean, she's an unreliable narrator, but it's not necessarily by choice, I don't think. I mean, although, I mean, I've some people's interpretations of the book, think that, maybe she is purposefully, misleading people, which is fine too. But, I do think whether or not you believe she's purposely misleading people, I think it's also, very reasonable to believe that she's not. I mean, she's 23 years old, remembering, what happened to her when she was 8. And also, so there's that sort of gap of memory. Your memories change as you go. It changes. Memories change by what people tell you, and she's got to watch, she gets to watch the Possession TV show episodes. I mean, that's going to affect her memory as well. Right. So even, she isn't quite sure what happened as well. So I hope, I was hoping that, her narrative would never feel like a cheat just because you were getting, that she was necessarily withholding stuff back. And I knew it had to be from her point of view, because if I did do it third person, I do feel like it would have been a cheat, that it would have been me withholding information from the reader.
That makes sense.
Because you feel like she's only unreliable just because, again, you only know what she knows, and she may not want to necessarily accept what's happening if it is in fact happening. Right.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think, again, like having that time span helps, and the time span within her memories, but also obviously, the time span between whether she's telling it, past tense or whatever is happening to her now, in talking with the interviewer.
Yeah. Have you gotten any like weird or interesting reactions from people? Have people been mad at you?
Yeah. I mean, I guess not counting I've gotten better at not reading online reviews. I wasn't better at it when A Head Full of Ghosts came out, but I've learned the hard way. But I would say the strangest one, I got like a Facebook message from someone saying, "Oh, I love the book, because it's so real because this is happening in my house right now with my niece," or something like that. And it
Oh
really was
gosh.
kind of like,
Oh man.
well, I wasn't sure if it was just like a troll or a put on, but the person seemed fairly sincere. They never like jumped out and said, "Hey, gotcha." I think I just said, "Hey, well, I would maybe
Yeah.
skip on The Exorcist and maybe try, to have, your niece see some counseling kind of thing." Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't a lot of fun receiving that. Otherwise, especially people who message me directly, it's more just, people have been very nice. I usually do get asked, what do you think happened or didn't happen? But again, I give them the same answer I just gave you.
I think that's fair.
Yeah,
I'm glad more
definitely.
people aren't mad at you. 'Cause I feel like you hear a lot, authors, especially when it's so easy to share your thoughts with writers now. I feel like we only really hear about the bad stuff. So I'm glad for the most part, no one yells at you.
Yeah. No, I could get more of the yelling for the cabinet at the end of the world, which I was really surprised by. Like I don't know, for some reason I didn't think that people would, what's the phrase I'm looking for? I don't know. I was surprised that people. I know it was an ambiguous ending for Cabin, but I was surprised so few people could extrapolate from that ending, for their own sort of ending.
See, I was prepared for that ending.
Yeah, so maybe like A Head Full of Ghosts sort of spoiled me because I feel like the reaction was generally pretty positive for most people. Anyway, I'm trying to like talk around sort of different endings. Without spoiling them necessarily. I know maybe people reading this have read A Head Full of Ghosts, but maybe not Cabin, so I don't want to spoil. I don't want to spoil two books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because, sorry, with A Head Full of Ghosts, I actually was totally like, yeah, it's possession. Like, I got to the end of it, and halfway through the book, a friend was like, "Oh, I'd read it. I love that. It's great. You're gonna love it." And I got to the end, and I texted him, and I said something about blah blah, like possession. He goes, "But was she possessed?" And I had to rethink the whole book.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I don't know. And it took me 2 more reads before I made up my mind.
Oh, wow. 2 more. So
2 more over what we're looking at, like 4 years, 3 years, where I finally made up my mind. So 3 times.
Well, let me ask you. What is it since you've made up your mind?
I do not think it's possession.
Okay.
But in my day job, I have to do a lot of training on like trauma and its effects on the brain. And so I think with that in mind, it's so clearly, to me, it's almost like it could be schizophrenia, but also just like PTSD. Like she reads,
right.
Like Marjorie reads like someone who was abused. And I think that everything that happens really reads that way. So to me, it's more, mental illness plus trauma, which is also potentially why even Mary as an adult could be unreliable because she's similarly traumatized.
Right.
That her brain didn't develop or create a protective core around what happened when she was 8. So I think it took me until rereading for this one where I finally sat down. I was like, you know what? I don't think it is. Like, I see all these things that I'm familiar with and trained on that, to me, it's mental illness.
Yeah. No, cool. No, I was going to say, Mary definitely, I think, hopefully, reacts with sort of some. No, I would say hopefully because I don't hope that she has PTSD, but clearly, living through what she lived through as an 8-year-old is going to affect her. Yeah, I don't know. It's still fun for me. I mean, even me to go back and think about the book. I'm sure there's always little details that I forget. Because I haven't reread it in a while. It's fun. I love hearing people, talk about their different theories about the book. I kind of feel like the more hardcore horror fans tend to fall towards it's the possession side of things, whereas people who aren't necessarily horror readers maybe more have your opinion. But it's certainly not 1-to-1.
I would agree with that. What about you, Brad? What do you think? Still undecided?
I was gonna say it is kind of more or less how you broke it down, but you have more experience in that, so I didn't go in depth. I was just kind of the whole basically PTSD thing, and again, just from all we know, they're both have PTSD, which is why she's so unreliable as a narrator. Yeah, I'm also someone who doesn't believe in possession, so that was already
Right.
out of my mind. But there was just the intricacies of the way you wrote some of the scenes was like, oh, okay, I might be turned around on this now. Maybe she really is. But then there's other scenes where it's just as subtle as others, where you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe not. Maybe there is something just really wrong with her. But yeah, I'm somewhat undecided. But the decided part of me is essentially what Ash said. Just like I said, not as in depth because I don't have that same kind of.
Yeah, I tried to pat myself on something and be like, well, she's both mentally ill and possessed. I'm like, that's just cheating. You got to pick one.
That's cheating. Yeah. Well, it's funny. Going back, I guess, to the question when you asked, like, would I watch like a show with someone being possessed? I think even like if people have the paperback, I wrote like a little liner notes section. I think I point out that there's a line probably at the halfway point where Mary says to her interviewer, something to the effect of, how is it that, the potential sort of mental breakdown of a 14-year-old girl, on like essentially not live TV, but on national television isn't horrific enough. Just the idea that, what is happening to Marjorie, regardless either way, is a horror. And some of that, I guess, is maybe a what's the word I'm looking for? It was a little bit to maybe a comment on like, some horror readers that would read this and be like, oh, nothing, nothing's going on, nothing scary. Like, no, how is, just because there isn't like, I don't know, because there isn't a ton of gore or violence, what's happening to her in real life is actually, whether or not something supernatural could still be happening is scary. I will say I did try to make, to me, the most disturbing parts of the book to be the ones that the parts of the book that didn't necessarily, I guess, were maybe the least supernaturally tinged potentially. Like those scenes in the movie were, for me, the most disturbing or scary. I mean, maybe one would be the tongue scene, where Marjorie is just, threatening her sister. I don't know. To me, I felt like that scene was really disturbing. And then obviously what happens with, the family at the dinner table.
Yeah, I did not see that one coming.
Well, because you hadn't read We Have Always Lived in the Castle first.
Exactly. Actually, The image that always like kind of haunts my mind, because I feel like for being kind of like, it's not like a giant book, but I feel like it's very visual. There's the part where she like jumps off the balcony of the stairs. I don't know what it is about that just like really scares me. Like I almost picture her looking like, have you seen The Page Master?
No.
When Jekyll turns into Hyde, the way they draw cartoon Hyde is just terrifying, and somehow those two images like blurred together for me in that moment. And that moment just really creeped me out for some reason.
Oh, cool. No, I was, I mean, as a horror, I was excited to get to that scene. I knew it was an important one, her jumping off the stairs and, to try to treat everything, to try to give everything either a supernatural tint in with a plausibility tint too was, I figured would be a little bit of a challenge. Just the idea that she might actually be levitating there for a moment or two. But, if the levitation is that brief, is it actually happening? Just the fact that this 14-year-old girl has been moved to, to jump from 2 stories, very dangerously could obviously result in her death is, I don't know, hopefully a nice build up to that scene that's disturbing and horrific on multiple levels.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, to kind of start wrapping this up, there's one, I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but how was it getting a blurb from Uncle Steve?
Oh, it was amazing. You mean August 19th, 2015? So yeah, a head full of ghosts came out early June of that summer. And then, I had heard that, I tried sending him a book through his assistant, but, his assistant was very nice, is very upfront that, he's got like a room full of books and, he'll wander through and pick one. So the chances are he probably won't get it. But I did hear from 2 friends / acquaintances that who are friends of Stephen, said they had sent him the book and said, "Yeah, you really should read this." So it's kind of like through most of that summer hoping that he would read it, and then it was like, late August. I was like, yeah, he gets sent 1,000 books. He's busy, or maybe he started it, didn't like it, kind of thing. And I was just home. Like we had bought a new table, so I was moving furniture and cranky, and it was hot, and school was starting, so I was bummed out. And then, my phone started, blowing up because other friends had seen Stephen King tweet about A Head Full of Ghosts before I did. And so I'm not ashamed to admit that I got teary-eyed. I mean, I became a reader, never mind a writer, because of Stephen.
Yeah.
So, I stopped moving furniture and went and grabbed my laptop and grabbed a 6-pack of beer out of the fridge and sat and had myself a one-man party, just watching people react to the tweet the rest of the night.
Oh man, you don't plan on getting that date tattooed on you or anything, or just the tweet?
Oh, it's all across my shoulders.
Oh man,
no,
I would definitely print out that tweet and frame it. That's for sure.
I will say that did help get me to read your book, because I really was in the mood for a ghost story. So I Googled ghost stories.
Yeah.
And I bought 3 books in the result of that. And A Head Full of Ghosts was one of them. Part was like, Stephen King says it's really good. I'm like, yeah, okay. And it was the first one of that chunk I read. And those 3 books are all tied together in my brain forever now.
Nice. What are the other 2 books?
Horror Store by Grady Hendrix.
Okay.
And The Elementals by Michael McDowell.
Ah, nice.
Which has now become your favorite book.
Yeah.
It is. That is like Head Full of Ghosts and Elementals are pretty tied together for me. I loved both those books. They were really good, like creepy summer reads.
Yeah.
So it always puts me in a very like warm mood to read both of them.
Nice. No, I know I need to read that. I've heard everyone who's ever read that book just raves about it. The Elementals. Yeah. No, I mean his tweet certainly changed the trajectory of the book. I mean, there's no. It's almost like no quantifying how much, he makes recommendations on Twitter all the time, but I think sort of like how he phrased the tweet really like made people like sit up and go, oh, okay. Saying like A Head Full of Ghosts scared the living hell out of me, and I'm not and I'm hard to scare, or something like that. Like, look at me pretending I don't know it by heart. I think, the book, the sales of the book went crazy from there, and it's really become like a cult hit. I mean, it still sells like 50 to 100 copies every week or 2.
Oh, man.
It's pretty crazy. 4 years, going on 4 years after the book was originally published.
That's amazing.
Well, I think from him you can really trust it too, because he always says like to be a good writer you need to be a reader, and I think people who really follow him take that seriously. There's plenty of things he's recommended that I wouldn't read, but I was like, it sounds good. I'm into this. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And I think it got me reading horror again overall, to be honest with you.
Cool.
I'd kind of just been reading King, but I hadn't really looked into things outside him. Like sometimes he can be all you read in the genre. Right. And so I think, honestly, I do think reading A Head Full of Ghosts really got me being like, there is more out there and I need to read it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that not every King reader is a horror reader. Clearly, if that was the case, I think horror would be one of the top-selling genres. So I'm always grateful to have the constant readers who aren't necessarily horror readers branch out based off of his recommendations, because Uncle Steve has been very good to me.
Yeah, no doubt. I meant to say this when we first started, but I also wanted to congratulate you on your newest release of short stories called Growing Things.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I've only read, I think, the first 2 so far, but I know Ash has finished it. She probably finished it, in a week after it came out?
Like, I think I couldn't get to it until it'd been out for a week, and I read it in 2 days.
Jesus.
Oh, wow, 2 days.
Yeah.
Man, that's a lot of reading.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
That's my one talent. That's what I'm really good at.
Reading fast?
Reading fast.
I am the complete opposite. I read extremely
slow. We managed to get through buddy reads, though.
Yeah,
we're
that's
good.
true. That is true.
But no, I definitely enjoyed the collection. I'd have a lot of questions, but I don't want to spoil them. I don't want to spoil any of the stories for Brad. I know they're ones he hasn't gotten to yet.
Okay.
Is there a new novel on the horizon?
Yes, it'll be out next July. I think it's going. I say I think because there's been discussion about. We've been arguing about the title. When I say we, my publisher and I, but I'm pretty sure at this point it's going to be called Survivor Song. It's coming out next July, and it's sort of, I guess, my sort of take on I'm not going to quite call it a zombie novel necessarily, but it is sort of an infected novel where a super rabies breaks out in and around the Boston area. And so there's no supernatural ambiguous element to the story at all. So it's, I know I can't do that forever. Everyone will get mad eventually if I do that all the time. But it does, I feel like it's a little bit of a quieter story maybe than a usual infected or zombie novel, but it really focuses on two characters and almost like a real-time situation. It's like basically 4 to 6 hours of this outbreak, early on in this outbreak. And one of the main characters is named Natalie, and she's in her mid-30s, and she's like 37, 38 weeks pregnant. And her best friend, Ramola, or Rams, as Natalie calls her, is a pediatrician.
I'm definitely curious. We know how your possession novels go, so I'm curious to see how an infected novel goes.
Yeah, hopefully.
I'm already hooked.
Yeah.
You already hooked. Yeah, it was. I had to do a lot of research for it, so that was hard. But my sister Erin, who's a nurse in Boston, was a huge help. And I also had the strange experience of emailing my children's pediatrician to ask him some like really potentially icky, uncomfortable questions, but he was totally into it, so that was cool.
At least he probably knows, like, in addition to being a teacher, you're a writer, so it's not like you're just this creep asking these weird questions.
Right.
Just end it with, by the way, I'm not writing anything, just wanted to know.
See, I did go to school for writing, and we always talked about how we really hoped we never got in trouble and someone had to look at our Google histories because they're pretty weird.
Yeah. Well, Paul, I thank you so much for doing this. We thank you so much for doing this. This was amazing.
It's very exciting. We were very nervous.
Yes.
So.
Well, no, thank you. I don't know. It's always fun to talk about a head full of ghosts. I mean, I will admit it has a very soft spot in my heart, if not my favorite, if I'm allowed to choose favorites.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll have you back next time around June or July then.
All right, cool.
All right, well, you take care and have a good rest of your night.
Okay, thanks, Brad Nash.
Thank you.